Welcome to Collaborative Mind Radio with Anthony Joseph, a radio podcast on positivepower21.org.
Good morning and welcome back to Collaborative Mind Radio. I'm Anthony Joseph, your host, and today we're going to talk about school discipline and looking at it from a different paradigm and a different point of view. So what is school discipline and what are we talking about? When we're talking about school discipline, we're talking about suspensions. We're talking about taking kids out of school from instructional time because they broke a rule or they did something wrong. Now, traditionally, that is usually done through suspensions or after-school detentions, and the student returns to school, does their makeup work, and resumes the class. Now, studies have shown over and over again that the more you suspend the student, the less they learn, and the more likely they are to not finish school. So what if we made a new rule? As of today, there are no more suspensions. You can no longer put a child out of school because of an infraction that was done in school. That means no more suspending for fighting, drug use, theft, all the major things that happen. But you still have to enforce your rules. You still have to imply some form of discipline. So, what does that now mean? What would that look like? That means that a child could get in a fight with another peer and return to school the next day? In theory, yes. But what does that imply? What would that mean for the student? So when we're talking about taking that type of penalty away, which is suspension, now we have to look at the cause of the problem. So now the student has to reflect on, I got in a fight with another peer. Why did I get in a fight? What am I going to do? How am I going to resolve it? It's a paradigm shift in the way we look at discipline and think about discipline. And what we like to also talk about is the ramifications for doing something like that. So if the rule is now you can no longer suspend students for fighting, but you still have to enforce some kind of discipline code, what would you do? So let's look at larger society. What happens when you get in an altercation in the street or in the mall? You would get arrested, you would go to jail, you would get a court date, and what typically would happen is you would get a plea deal to say if you do some kind of anger management, if you do some kind of mediation, all charges will be dropped. Probation before judgment, PBJ. That's what happens in the criminal justice system, the reality of the criminal justice system. So now if we start doing that in schools, student A gets in a fight with student B. He has to come to school. He has to go on to class. What are you going to do? Well, I would say that you make the students problem solve. And what does that mean? That means looking at the situation from a couple different perspectives. Student A has to look at why he got into the fight. Did he initiate it? Did he cause it? Was it a misunderstanding? How can it be resolved? Is it an issue that happened from out in the community that came into the school? And again, how was it going to be resolved? How are you going to get along to work and complete your days at school? So now your administration has to put these two students together and ask them to talk, communicate, think. What are the ramifications of something like that? What would a student learn from a situation like that? Well, they would learn a couple of things. They would learn that you have to problem solve. You're going to have to get along. You're going to have to think before you act. And there's another way to resolving issues other than fighting. That would be the goal of critical thinking through problems in school. What are the ramifications of something like that in a larger society? If we started doing something like that in kindergarten, first grade, early education years, all the way through high school, now you're asking kids to think before they act. And thinking before you act or thinking before you do is called critical thinking. So if we start imparting skills about critical thinking and infusing them into our policies in school, the ramifications that we would have in a larger society would be in theory, enormous, because people can then think out situations before they act. The other part is that you don't lose time in your educational setting. And yes, there are a lot of things that happen that when you put a kid out of school, that they're losing their educational face time. But if they're losing that face time in education, it's hard to gain it back without direct instruction. So if there are no more suspensions, you don't lose direct instruction time. Kids will still learn. And some of the biggest issues that we look at across the school system is usually fights, physical altercations. And again, the ability to solve those issues or problems using critical thinking is just a mindset and a change that has large ramifications throughout society and could make a big difference in a child's life. When we're also talking to children, we're also talking about school discipline and changing our paradigm or our view of what happens. We have to kind of change our paradigm of what the purpose of education is. If we walk into a school system saying that every moment, everything that a child does is going to perpetuate learning from that mistake or learning to improve that person, we're no longer being punitive in our discipline, but we're taking a moment to give students opportunities to learn. If our goal is to make education opportunities to learn, then I would say we do have to take suspensions out of school and give students that opportunity to learn at all costs. Yes, there are some things that are horrendous. If a student were to have drugs in school, what do we have to do? Do you put them out? And what message are we giving him? What are we sending? He's still going to have the drugs. He's most likely still going to do the drugs. But now if we do it at a critical thinking phase or paradigm look, now you have to get the parent involved. Now the parent has to say something. Now that parent may have to come in out of work or out of their typical day to resolve an issue. Because we have to think, when we're looking at education, it's not just a one-sided plate. It's two sides to education. It's the education from the home to the school and the school to the home. We have to work together. So again, if we're using our mantra of collaborative mind radio, we can do anything as long as we build together. So if we're building this new system of education together, everyone is involved and problems can get solved. I'd love to hear your comments, read your views, and thoughts about this. Again, you can reach out to Collaborative Mind Radio through our Twitter account at Collaborative Me on Twitter. You can reach out to me at Anthony Joseph on Facebook. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to my thoughts and ideas, and I'd love to hear yours. This is, again, Collaborative Mind Radio, where we believe we can do anything as long as we build together. Thank you.